All right. Hi, Winston. Hi, Ken. Thank you so much for joining me here today on Vonvo.com. Today is March 24th, 2013, and we're here to discuss, gun control in America. Just before we get started, I wanted to go over two quick ground rules. The first is that right now this conversation is being recorded, and after the recording is completed, we'll be uploading this video to the internet to our YouTube channel. Is that okay with both of you?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Sure, that's fine.
Great. And then on top of that, here at Vonvo, we're all about our discussion staying both civil and valuable. We don't want there to be any personal attacks against anyone. Are you guys fine with that ground rule?
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So then let's get our conversation started. Just for the people who are watching this conversation right now, and anyone who were to watch this conversation on YouTube later on, would you each mind just giving a quick background of yourself and why you're so passionate about this topic? And Winston, since this is your first time on Vonvo, maybe you can go first.
Yeah, sure. Spent 8 years in the United States Marine Corps. I've been around guns my whole life. I got exposed to guns early on in the Boy Scouts. I'm an Eagle Scout. And, I think if you look back at the historical documents and our founding fathers and really look at some of the key issues, the Second Amendment really is a huge part of our freedoms here in the United States. So I've been very passionate about it for quite some time, probably going back to my early times in the Marine Corps.
Great. And Ken?
Well, first I'd like to say, Winston, thank you very much for your service to this country. That's amazing.
Thank you.
What did you do specifically? I'm just curious.
I did various jobs. I started out, I had a rifle platoon. Then I had a weapons platoon, which included a 60 millimeter mortar section. I don't know if you all saw in the news recently. There were 7 Marines that were killed, and there were several that were injured. So I did that, and then I worked on the battalion staff for about 8 months. I was embarkation officer, logistics officer, responsible for deploying the battalion of about 800 Marines. So I was involved with a lot of the logistics. Then after leaving 5th Marines, I was in 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines. Upon leaving there, I was assigned to the Marine Combat Training Battalion on Camp Pendleton, where we did a lot of the hands-on training for Marines for, basically giving them their basic combat skills. And then after that, I spent 2 years in the Special Operations Training Group.
Okay, so I'm not going to mess with Winston. Well, anyway, to finish my background, I've never been in the military, but I really am a strong supporter of the Second Amendment. It's been kind of scary to see everything that's been going on, and now that we know that the assault weapons ban is not going to be in the Senate bill, I feel a little more comfortable, but the attacks will never stop. So again, I'm not going to disclose what kind of guns I have or what I don't have, and I don't think I should have to, nor do I think any gun owner should have to. So that's about it for me.
Great. So, what I was going to kind of ask each of you, just to kind of ease our way into the discussion. Winston, would you mind kind of giving us your overall take on the current, gun crisis issue here in the U.S., unless you don't think that there is any gun crisis issue, but kind of give us your take from the outside looking in, this topic as a whole. What do you make of it?
All right. Well, I think there's a lot of misinformation. There's a lot of rules already on the books, so to speak. But I think that if you look at, and there's been a lot of knee-jerk reactions that have been taking place. The problem is none of the proposed legislation really kind of addresses the underlying issue. With current healthcare law, regardless of how Obamacare is rolled out. The problem is such that you've got young men that have mental illnesses that are either 18 or above the age of 18, where with current HIPAA guidelines, which are essentially, privacy laws and such, that until these types of records are released, I am a federal firearm licensee, and I do transfers and I do background checks. The problem is the NICS database, the FBI database, is not connected to the current healthcare system. And so, I can do, they can do all the universal background check laws, pass all this that they want, and it's going to be essentially irrelevant because the people that they're trying to catch are not even going to be included into the database. So until that problem gets fixed, all this talk about universal background checks is missing a big portion of the problem. And, they talk about a gun show loophole, but really that's a fallacy. There is no gun show loophole because here in New Mexico and across the country, people that I shoot with, that I'm friends with, and this may be the case for Ken too, I have friends that are concealed carry holders. They've gone through a background check. They've been fingerprinted by the state of New Mexico. They've been issued a license. I know that they're
Ken,
still there, Winston?
Yeah, did he time out for you, or is he there?
Yeah, he timed out for me.
Winston, are you there? Not seeing him. 1 second. He's got an interesting look on his face, too. Do you have that?
There he goes.
Yeah.
Hopefully he's coming right back in.
Okay, 1 second. Let me message him on Facebook for a second. Where is he? Exit out of the site and then
He's back. Or
yeah,
kind of.
Okay. Leave, exit Vonvo, and then re-enter, rejoin the room. Okay, good. He just probably exited, and now he'll rejoin. Hey, Winston, you there?
I don't know if you guys can hear me.
Yeah, we hear
Yep,
you.
we got you.
Yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yep. Hear you great, actually, and there's no more echo now.
Okay, good. I got a question from David asking if most of gun violence is committed by mentally ill people. I think most of the mass shootings that we've had have been perpetrated by young men with severe mental illness. So the background system, the way it sits today, with it being firewalled through HIPAA health laws and such, until it's connected, the NICS database is going to miss those folks. And clearly, we need to. That's where we need to focus because that's where all of the recent majority of instances where a lot of people have been killed quickly. That's been the case. I also think that if you go back to the 1994 assault weapons ban, the ban dealt mostly with cosmetic issues relative to firearms. So, and the whole term assault weapon to me is a fallacy in and of itself. Because if I were to take a bottle and smash the top of it off and use that to attack somebody, now I'm assaulting them. Assault is a behavior. It's not, you could use a pen, you could use whatever you want. It's more the behavior. And I don't think that most law-abiding citizens that own an AR-15 are using it to commit assaults. It's a recreational / hunting / defensive weapon. So that's kind of my quick overview.
Right. And
Very good.
Ken, go ahead.
No, what I was just going to say is I live in the state of Illinois, and of course we've got some of the most stringent, gun laws here. To start with, we have to have a FOID card, and to get that FOID card, we go through a background check. Now we want to go out and make a purchase, or we want to purchase a gun, a handgun in particular. It's a 72-hour cool-off period, where they do with the Illinois State Police do another background check. It's a 24-hour period for shotguns and hunting rifles. So, I don't know where a national background is really going to make that much difference. We're already background checked to death at this point. I don't see how another one's really going to stop anything. I do agree, and at least I can't speak for New Mexico, but in Illinois, if you have ever been put into inpatient in a mental hospital, you cannot get a FOID card. Doesn't say anything about outpatient. It doesn't say anything about people who are frontally committed, but as far as the law of states in Illinois, you can't get a FOID card, therefore legally you cannot get a gun.
Right, and so both Winston and Ken, David is throwing some interesting questions down at the bottom, and I guess one is relating to Illinois. He says, "Are crimes in Illinois being committed with legally purchased firearms? How good are city and state level checks when surrounding areas don't have the same checks?" What are your guys' opinions on that?
Well, David, what I would say as far as the crimes that are being committed in Illinois, no, most of them are being committed through firearms that were either stolen, which you had about 3 weeks ago. You had over 400 firearms stolen from a St. Louis depot. All those weapons were sent to the city of Chicago. Those two gentlemen were later arrested. And they only received 6 years. The other one got 9 years prison sentence. And to me, the bigger issue is the fact that we don't have mandatory sentences for people who steal guns. And I actually wrote a blog on this morning, just saying that what about having a 25-year mandatory sentence for people who are stealing guns that get caught. I think we need people to have some sort of deterrent in this country. And I'm not saying it's going to stop every single situation, but I think at some point, you might have some people say, wait a minute, I don't know if I want to do this heist. Maybe I don't want to steal this gun if I'm facing 25 years.
Right. I'm not. Maybe Winston might be having some tech issues on his end.
Yeah, we lost him again.
But not a problem. Ken, my concern is, like you guys talk about the different legislation and whatnot, and really trying to tackle the concept behind. And I really want to get Winston's remarks on this concept also, but trying to drill down this topic after all these conversations we've had, you really have to segregate it into pieces. And so you have, guns problem versus violence problem, and then you throw, mental health into there, and Winston started discussing it. I mean, does one part get solved without the other, or do you think one of these parts has nothing to do with the other, or do you think that they're interconnected?
Well, I guess it depends on who you talk to. In some ways, they're interconnected. When it comes to criminals that are on the streets, I believe that you could make a connection with the level of violence and the gun violence that's out there in the streets of Chicago, for example. I don't know if it really helped the situation very much, but Rahm Emanuel just closed, or just announced that he's going to be closing 52 schools, mostly in poor areas of the city. You're going to have kids walking further distances to other schools. You're going to have some kids who are going to be more proponents of gang violence. And unfortunately, when that happens and one of those children is shot or one of them is killed, nobody's going to blame Rahm Emanuel. They're going to blame the gun. So I think there are some connections that can be made. But I think dealing with the issues might be looked at as two separate things in some ways. Because one of the issues we have is that we all of a sudden had this horrific event at Sandy Hook, and then the gun advocate or the gun control advocates went crazy and said, we have to do this, we have to do that, and they stirred up a panic in this country, and now you've got more guns on the streets than we had before the Sandy Hook shooting. So I think they kind of defeated their own purpose, and the assault weapons ban is being taken off. So I don't know. In some ways, I think that they created a bigger problem for themselves. But I am for safe storage of weapons. I think that there should be mandatory sentences in place as well for people who decide to not keep their guns in a safe place. And when a child, right now I think it's under the age of 14, the owner of that gun can get prosecuted. I think that age should be lifted to 17 myself, and I think that they should be prosecuted if that gun ends up being used in a violent crime. That owner of that gun who left it unlocked, I think they should pay for that.
Right. And so, and just so you know, Winston just said he thinks his internet went down. So, unfortunately, I guess that comes with maybe the New Mexico territory. I don't know. I've never been. But he's trying to rejoin now. He just said. So not a problem. Recently, there was just the news that it was Harry Reid who was taking off the assault weapons ban idea.
Right.
They were just totally leaving that out to dry. That wasn't going to happen anymore.
Correct. I mean, does it mean it's going to go away for good? Of course not. Their agenda is still going to be to do some sort of ban, and I read an article not too long ago that the next step would be to ban handguns. And again, like I said, the more times you create panic, the worse you make your situation. And I made this example a couple of weeks ago here on Vonvo. If the government came out or the health department said, you can no longer eat jelly donuts, everybody's going to run out and get jelly donuts. That's just the nature of the way it works. And that's what happened with our guns. And I see you're back, Winston.
Can you guys hear me okay?
Yeah, we hear you just fine. Hopefully the internet will, be cooperative. Winston, we were just kind of talking about the idea of, we kind of just went into assault weapons bans, but, we were talking about the idea of there being a guns problem and a mental health problem and a violence problem, and like how are we supposed to kind of tackle this issue where it's sort of like confused whether or not these things are all interconnected or not, or if they each need to be solved one by one. Can you kind of give us your take on that whole situation when that argument gets brought up?
There is definitive evidence. I've got some stuff on my blog where I want to say the Cato Institute and the Centers for Disease Control, CDC, have actually done some studies on violent video games, and there is clearly a relation there. We still don't know because they haven't released any of the information. Adam Lanza, I mean, it's not like there's going to be a trial. There's no defendant. I don't know why the state and the government had not released. Very shortly after the Columbine, they released the security surveillance video from the facility. But for the Vice President of the United States to be going around saying, get a shotgun, it's easier to shoot. I mean, that is just blatant misinformation, and he was essentially proposing for most Americans to break the law. If you're in a city municipality, you can't go outside and fire 2 blasts from a shotgun. So when you have politicians and people that are clueless about firearms passing laws, I mean, Senator McCarthy, when asked about her original language in the assault weapons ban, was asked, "What's a barrel shroud?" And she could not answer the question. She didn't know what a barrel shroud was. She goes, "It's the thing that goes up," was her response. The thing that goes up. So when you have clueless people that don't know anything about firearms passing the laws restricting, we got some major issues. And that to me tells me that it's not about fixing the problem. It's more about control. But full term assault weapon, I want to say that I don't agree with that. And I think that they've labeled these weapons assault weapons, and how many Americans are using these to commit assaults? Most violent gun crimes are committed with a handgun, not because they're easy to conceal, they're easier to carry, they're lighter weight. And even at the Sandy Hook shooting, there's still no evidence that the AR-15 that he had in the trunk was ever brought into the school. It was not. And you're not seeing and hearing that in the news. That weapon was found in his trunk. The only weapons he took in, supposedly, were the 2 pistols and the shotgun. So a lot of the talk about an assault weapons ban, really, to me, it's kind of demagoguery. David asked about other countries. I think it's hard to compare other countries to the United States because, Australia, they confiscated all their guns, but it's a much different society. They didn't have a Second Amendment. They don't have. It's hard to do that, and I think it's still too early to really be able to make analogies and comparisons.
What do you think about that, Ken?
Well, from what I've read, and I'm not gonna cite specific percentages because they say 99% of all statistics are made up at the time they're said. But I have heard that a lot of countries that have banned guns doesn't necessarily mean that their violent crime rate fell. Murders might have been reduced, but violent crimes were a lot of times higher than the United States. So I don't know if I could really say that yes, just because they ban their guns is going to make it any different here in the United States. And the bottom line is, it doesn't really matter, David, because these other countries don't have a constitution like we have here that gives us the right to bear arms.
Right. So, yeah, go ahead, Winston.
I want to make a statement though, because it's hard for us to compare to other countries when you look at the basis for the United States. Our founding fathers, they really researched the putting together of our government. These guys had just come from a tyrannical king who was bestowing taxes on them without representation. There was a lot of things that were going on, but I think one of the key things that we really can't forget is that they were influenced by John Locke, who was an English philosopher, and he said that there were certain inalienable rights that were bestowed by our Creator on each and every human being, and those were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And so that really was the kind of the principality that was put into the Second Amendment that you have this innate, actually, if you think about it, natural law. If you go back to one of the other things that John Locke talks about, natural law, is that, mother cub or mother bear has an innate sense to protect her offspring, and that's within all of us as well. And so a firearm is kind of an extension of that. And so when the Founding Fathers wrote the Second Amendment, they felt that they really needed to have that, not so much to reinforce the inalienable innate, but to restrict governments from coming in and taking the ability of the individual to protect him or herself.
And then I think, Dave, you asked another question about the Constitution, how it's written, or what's more important, the modern societal environment. Well, I mean, to me, it's obviously the Constitution. I mean, that is the founding document that our forefathers gave us, and I think we have to abide by what the Constitution says, and I completely agree with it. Again, I don't think that we should make it easier for criminals who are on the streets, who are going to have these weapons anyway, to be able to come into my house and threaten my family. I think that because I'm a law-abiding citizen, I have the right to defend myself and my family, regardless of what gun I want to choose, as long as it's legal to own.
I think he asked another question here about the amendment ending slavery. I think there are some societal evolutions that take place. I'll use the example of the First Amendment. And, unfortunately, one of the things that's rampant on the internet is pornography. There's a lot of filth that's out there, but yet you don't see or hear the same types of restrictions, the same types of things limiting, because it's freedom of speech in the First Amendment. And I think that, if our founding fathers were alive today, they'd say, that's guaranteed by the First Amendment. But yet, if you look at that specific, filth that's out there, it really leads to divorce. It leads to unwanted pregnancies. There's a lot of ramifications of just that. So you can't just look at the Bill of Rights and say, okay, it's, you walk on a very slippery slope if you start whittling away at what the Founding Fathers put together in these documents.
Do you have a camera, David? I'd love to have you jump on.
So, just quickly, Winston, what I wanted to ask you about before, that I feel like, if we had a pro-gun control individual on the panel right now, they would probably ask you about, is you said there's no private gun show loopholes, but in terms of trying to find like some common ground, I mean, is it safe to say that practically very minimal background checks ever take place at those private gun shows? And if, let's say, pro-gun control individuals wanted to implement, full mainstream background checks, both in public purchases and private purchases, that would be something that you would feel fine with doing, because what's the harm that comes with that, or not really?
Since that gun shows are done through dealers, not private. I've been to a lot of gun shows here in New Mexico. I've been to gun shows in Arizona, Texas. Most people are going through a dealer. There are private, you'll see people walking around with rifles that have a sign for sale. So, and that's not just at gun shows. So that's the thing I'm trying to say. They call it a gun show loophole, but here in New Mexico, they advertise rifles and pistols for sale in the newspaper all the time. I can show my concealed carry. I could, if I want to, sell, well, I can't now because I'm a dealer, but as a private citizen, can in New Mexico, if he had a gun he wanted to sell it, he could sell it to another citizen. Now, there's some certain things that recommend that people do. See if they have a CCW. If they're a concealed carry, they've already submitted themselves to the state to be background investigated and fingerprinted. So very high probability that they're a law-abiding citizen. A lot of times, if you know somebody, people I shoot with, friends, family, a lot of gun transfers in New Mexico take place between fathers, sons, brothers. So why should they have to go through a dealer and pay a fee to have a firearm transferred amongst family members? That's what they're proposing. These people now would be criminals if they transferred a firearm to somebody in their family without going through a dealer.
Right, and I can say that here in Illinois, the gun shows here, the buyer has to present their firearm owner identification card to the at the gun trade show. Otherwise, they're not supposed to. Private to private sales, again, there's no way to control it. But on the trade show side, the only thing they avoid is the 3-day cool-off period. Now, looks like we got David.
Hey, David, are you there? Hey, David, are you there? If this is the same David as before, his microphone has worked in the past, but he'll chime in as soon as I guess he gets his microphone working. So
in the single-shot pistol, because you can make the same analogy. I mean, in the Heller case versus DC, talked about weapons of common use. And right now, an AR-15 is a weapon of common use in our society, just as the musket was in those days. So you can use the same analogy if you look at like the printing press versus an iPhone and an iPad and the internet today. You're not seeing restrictions on the internet. You're not seeing restrictions on the use of these modern technologies that we all know and love. So why should we expect that would transfer over to weapons and firearms of the modern era? So I don't agree that argument really kind of holds water in my opinion. I need to step out. I had somebody just come up to my door, so I got to step out real quick. Be right back.
Yeah. David, are you there?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I hear you just great. Ken, do you hear David?
Yes, I do.
All right, David, what were some of your thoughts? Were you did you have something in particular you wanted to mention?
Yeah, I wanted to focus on the Constitution, and Winston mentioned the idea that technology isn't really limited, even though we progressed from the print press. But do firearms have the same relationship as technology that's advanced, or do firearms present a danger to society?
Right, and I think we're just playing sort of devil's advocate for a second. I mean, Winston, do you think a pro-gun control individual, has the right to say, it's not a good comparison looking at it, that the technology should evolve from printing press to iPhones, muskets to AR-15s. Ultimately, guns can kill people. Obviously, there are plenty of people, majority of people use them safely. But in the end, I mean, we're talking about, two different things that, one is a life or death scenario and another is just a more, sophisticated device to communicate with people. So do you see where pro-gun control individuals would say, there's got to be a limit here?
I can see that. I can't say that I agree with it, because it's a slippery slope. If you start whittling away at the verbiage and try to say that now you're on a slippery slope, and it says that it shall not be infringed. Now we've already got restrictions on full automatic weapons. It's NFA has to go through a Class 3 dealer, so there are already restrictions that have been placed to limit control of what I would consider, weapons of, that could really do a lot of harm. But I think it gets back to another issue that we haven't really talked about, and that's going back to the evil in men's hearts. I mean, ever since biblical days of Cain killing his brother Abel, it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. I mean, you look at McVeigh blowing up the Murrah building in Oklahoma. You're never going to rid any society. I don't care what David said, 3 million people in the founding, the population of the United States now are 350 million. That's irrelevant. There's going to be bad people in our society. And as an individual and as an American citizen, I have the right, personal protections and personal responsibility. I'm not going to rely on the police to protect my family or my loved ones. I take that as a personal responsibility. And I think most Americans would agree with that. So, my feeling is that police show up at crime scenes, not at crimes. So it's my responsibility. If somebody will kick in my door in the middle of the night, if I call 911, there's a chance that, by the time the cops get there, I might be dead. So, that's fine if David wants to, trust the local law enforcement. I think one of the things that you're going to start to see that's concerning to me, not only in what happened in Katrina, but with local municipalities like in Detroit, where they're really under severe financial distress, what's going to happen to their local law enforcement? Are they going to be able to field the size of police departments that they need to protect their citizenry? And if they're not, then whose responsibility is it to protect? And that's something I think most Americans need to think about.
And I think you also have to consider, every time we talk about more gun control laws, we're talking about law-abiding citizens getting affected by it. And that's because criminals don't follow gun laws. That's the bottom line. They could care less. And as a matter of fact, they would prefer to have stricter gun laws because it makes it easier for them to do what they want to do. What else you got, David?
Yeah, let me first start responding with the Winston. When we're talking about human nature, you can look at Japan, for instance, where they have very strict gun control, and there's very little violence. There's very little crime levels. So I would disagree that it's human nature. I think it's more of a cultural issue. If we perpetuate this culture, allowing for violence, it's going to continue. And
Japan's a very homogeneous society. Essentially one race of population. The United States is a melting pot. We've got people from all walks of life, all over the world, and that is a huge strength to our society. So, I still don't think that you can make that comparison. I'm sorry.
But even looking at the homogeneous nature of Japan, I think when you look at crime and violence related to crime, it's more about poverty. It's more about cultural upbringing.
I will agree. I think that there's a huge socioeconomic effect. If you look in the inner cities, that unfortunately a lot of these youth feel that there's no other option for them other than to take what other people have, and that's that goes to a whole different topic, a whole different issue.
Right. I call that like a crime of logic, where you have to ask yourself, if I can't get a job, unemployment's at 16, 17% in this area, what is my best opportunity? And unfortunately, people tend to go to crime. So I think part of the gun control problem is solving our economic issues.
I think to a certain extent, definitely there. The family issue too. We have a lot of young children that are born out of wedlock to single moms that are on welfare. That you know, the moms are working or they're not able to be with their kids. So supervision, the, the the amount of filth that exists on the internet, in our movies, um, you know, video games. I mean, some of these video games are just unbelievable, and the graphics in them are unbelievable.
Yeah,
So,
I agree with you, but if you look globally, they have they have pornography, they have gun violence in movies, they have video games that are very violent, but you don't necessarily see the same level of gun violence in society as you do here.
But hey, David, I'm just curious.
Yeah.
Do you blame the gun or do you blame the shooter?
Both.
Okay. What did the gun do?
The gun's a tool that enables someone to kill at a greater degree compared to other tools.
But with that regard, couldn't anything then be considered a tool?
What was that?
I mean, no. What I'm saying is if you're going to say if a gun is a tool, well, that's fine. But then what about everything else? I mean, I could kill somebody with a hammer.
You can kill someone with a hammer or a baseball bat, but you have to ask yourself a few questions. One, is that baseball bat serving an alternate function? Is the primary function of that baseball bat to kill someone? And three, how many crimes are being committed with baseball bats? And how effective is that baseball bat to create massive damage? For instance, I'm not going to go into a movie theater with a baseball bat and beat up 20 people. It's not going to happen. 20 people, it's not going to happen.
Well, maybe not. So
like you can run away from someone with a baseball bat.
Do you own a firearm, David?
No, I don't.
So where do you live?
Massachusetts.
Where are you, in a big city or are you out in the country?
Boston.
So you're right in downtown Boston?
A little bit outside.
Are you married? Do you have kids in your home?
Single. No kids.
Okay. No, so I'm just curious. So let's say there was, I don't know, Boston, if you have big storms and such. I mean, you remember when Katrina hit?
Yeah.
You know, those are little, in my opinion, those are natural disasters that can occur that cause mayhem and can cause anarchy. I was living in California when the Watts riots happened, and you know, a lot of the Korean store owners in Koreatown were interviewed afterwards, and they said that if they had not had firearms, they would not have been able to protect their properties from being in their stores from being burnt. Or do you have a business? What do you do?
Yeah, I'm a student. I served 4 years in the military.
Okay, thank you for your service.
Yeah. Thank you for yours.
You know, so I think that there's a lot more than just looking at it in terms of you know, you gotta look at the bigger picture here. And
right. And Winston, the thing I was trying to focus on is that I don't want to. The issue isn't taking people's guns or banning guns. Like, that's not the emphasis here. I think the emphasis here is finding some sort of solution.
Right, and
how can we minimize the violence?
And so I was just gonna
see. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, if you guys could focus on, you know, some different common ground solutions that you think are actually out there. As David just mentioned, he doesn't think this should be about, you know, stripping people away from their guns and whatnot. This should just be about trying to find out some solutions, and what common ground might exist. If you could focus the remainder of your discussion on that, I just needed to tell you that in a few minutes I have to run and I have to do another Vonvo. So, you know, in a few minutes I'll be running, but I just want to also thank you each for your time, you know, while I'm still here, okay?
Yeah, it's great.
Thanks,
I'm going to
Mike.
have to get going here soon, too, in about 5 minutes. Well,
Winston, you still there?
yeah, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yeah, I figured since you had to go, I figured that you keep talking to David.
I think that controlling the violence in dealing with human nature and dealing with the, like you had mentioned earlier about controlling violent crime. I mean, the